They told me the mating ceremony would be private, witnessed only by the High Council and the goddess herself. That lie shattered the moment I stepped into the grand hall and saw hundreds of nobles packed into the stone chamber, their eyes already judging me, already remembering. I am Saray, daughter of a traitor, teacher of forgotten children, and now the Alpha King's unwanted bride. My hands trembled as I walked that impossible distance toward the throne where Jonathan sat in firelight and armor, looking every bit the brutal king from the stories. Every step reminded me that I was here to pay for my father's sins, chosen because my noble blood runs pure, but my disgraced name ensures no family will interfere. When I reached the throne and curtsied low, the high priestess raised her hands to begin the binding words. But Jonathan did something no one expected. He stood, descended the 3 steps separating us, and pulled me onto his lap before the entire court. The hall fell into suffocating silence. His hand trembled against my waist. His voice cracked when he whispered the binding words meant only for me. And I realized this king, who everyone feared, was just as trapped as I was. Over his shoulder, Lord Garrett watched us with cold calculation, and I knew this ceremony was only the beginning. The day the guards came, I was teaching the younger ones how to write their names, their tongues stuck on the curves of the letters, ink blotting on rough paper, while winter light slanted through the warped glass. For a little while, I could almost forget who I was. In this village, I was just Mistress Saray, the quiet Omega who knew stories and letters and never raised her voice. Then the door creaked open, and the air changed. 3 royal guards filled the doorway, steel and leather swallowing the cramped schoolroom. The children went silent so fast it hurt. I set the piece of chalk down, wiped the dust from my fingers, and forced my heartbeat to slow. Saray of House Velinor? The captain asked. No one in the village used my family name. I stood anyway. Yes. His eyes flicked over the children, then back to me, something almost like pity passing through his gaze before it vanished beneath duty. By command of Alpha King Jonathan, you are to pack your belongings and accompany us to the royal fortress at once. The smallest girl, Lila, grabbed my skirt. Teacher, did you do something wrong? I had done nothing wrong. My father had. I'll explain later. I lied softly. My hand shook as I pried her fingers loose. Keep practicing your letters. Master Harlan will take over for me. The schoolmaster hovered in the back, face ashen, mouth pressed into a thin line. He knew my name. He knew what it meant for the king to remember it. I can speak to them, he whispered as I passed. Maybe this is a mistake. It wasn't. Mistakes did not travel with royal crests hammered into their breastplates. Thank you, I said, because there was nothing else. I packed in less time than it had taken to unpack 5 years ago when the village had been my exile and my sanctuary. A few dresses, 2 worn books the children loved, a handful of letters from former students thanking me for teaching them to read. Everything else in the cottage belonged to the school. When I stepped outside, the entire lane had gathered faces I knew from market days, women with flour on their hands, men smelling of wood smoke and sweat, children peeking from behind skirts. No one said the word traitor out loud, but I heard it anyway. The captain offered his arm as if I were still a lady and not the ruin of one. I ignored the gesture and climbed into the waiting carriage on my own. Nobility was ashes in my mouth. I would not pretend I still wore it. The village shrank behind us, the schoolhouse roof the last thing I saw before the road curved away. I pressed my palms to my knees to keep them from shaking. Do you know why the king has summoned me? I asked after the silence stretched too long. The captain hesitated, then said, There will be a mating ceremony in 3 days' time. The words didn't make sense at first. Whose? He looked at me steadily. His Majesty's. Yours. I almost laughed. The sound came out wrong, thin and sharp. You have the wrong Omega. Orders were clear, my lady. My lady. As if that title hadn't been stripped from me on the execution platform along with my father's head. I turned my face to the window so they wouldn't see the way my composure cracked. A king's bride. I knew what that meant for someone like me. Not honor. Not joy. Utility. My womb filling the space my father's name had burned out of the kingdom's memory. By the time the fortress rose on the horizon, black stone knives piercing the sky, my fear had numbed into something colder. Resignation. Inside the outer gates, servants lined the courtyard, their eyes trained to the ground, but their ears sharp. Whispers stirred as I stepped down from the carriage. Is that her? The traitor's girl? He needs an heir. No one will fight for her. The words slid over my skin like old bruises pressed again. I kept my chin lifted, walking between them as if I didn't hear a thing. A woman waited at the top of the staircase, tall, slim, wrapped in mourning black that did nothing to soften the razor lines of her face. Her hair, dark streaked with silver, was twisted into an intricate knot that spoke of patience and wealth. Lady Miriam, the captain murmured with a bow. So, the dead queen's sister. Her gaze swept over me like a blade, taking in my simple traveling dress, my calloused, ink-stained fingers, the omega scent I could never quite blunt, no matter how much soap I used. This is the king's choice, she said, not to me, but to the heir. I go where I'm ordered, I replied, before I could stop myself. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, as do we all. Her eyes sharpened. For a heartbeat, something like reluctant amusement flickered there, then vanished. You have your father's tongue. I flinched as if she'd slapped me. My father is dead. Yes. She stepped closer, so close I could see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the grief that had long ago curdled into something harder. Executed as a traitor to this crown. Do not imagine that marrying our king will erase that. In this court, you will always be the traitor's daughter. Nothing more. The words landed exactly where she meant them to, right in the hollow space where my family used to be. I understand, I said. Her lips twisted. We shall see. She turned on her heel and walked away, silk skirts whispering over stone, dismissal as complete as any door slammed in my face. A maid led me through endless corridors, each more polished and echoing than the last, until my legs ached and my senses blurred. When she finally opened a door and stepped aside, I froze on the threshold. The chambers were enormous. A carved four-poster bed draped in blue and silver, a hearth already lit, tapestries on the walls depicting kings of old, their wolves rearing beneath moonlight. A balcony, overlooking the courtyard. This room was bigger than the entire cottage I had lived in for 5 years. His Majesty ordered that you have the Queen's apartments, the maid said, her eyes carefully blank. The word queen tasted like a cruel joke. Will the king be coming here? I hated the small tremor in my voice. I do not know, my lady. Another title that didn't fit. A bath has been prepared through there. The seamstresses will arrive at dawn for your fittings. My fittings. The gown I would wear to stand beside the man who held my father's life and my future in his hands. When she left, the silence rushed in all at once. I sank onto the edge of the bed, fingers fisting in the embroidered coverlet, and stared up at the painted ceiling. Gold stars gleamed in careful constellations I once traced in dusty astronomy texts. 5 years ago, I had watched my father die in the capital's square, his blood steaming on the stones while the crowd shouted for justice. I had promised myself I would never return to this world of crowns and courts, yet here I was. Not as a spectator this time, but as a sacrifice. I lay back without undressing, the weight of the fortress pressing down from all sides. Jonathan did not come. I hadn't truly expected him to, but some foolish, wounded part of me had hoped for at least a glimpse of the man whose decree had wrapped itself around my life. Instead, the night passed with only the crackle of the hearth and the echo of Lady Miriam's words for company. Traitor's daughter. Nothing more. In the morning, when the seamstresses laced me into silks the color of a storm-tossed sea and pinned my hair with silver combs, I caught my reflection in the tall mirror. For a moment, I saw her the girl I had once been before the execution, before the village, before ink-stained fingers and children's laughter. Chin high, eyes bright, a noble's daughter who believed the world was hers to read and rewrite. The sight hurt more than anything Lady Miriam had said, because tomorrow, that girl would walk into a hall full of wolves and sit on the lap of the king who held both her past and her future in his hands. And whatever happened after that, I knew one thing for certain. There would be no going back. They walked us out of the hall to the sound of applause that felt more like a sentence than a celebration. My arm was tucked into Jonathan's, our steps perfectly matched as we climbed stair after stair toward the highest tower of the fortress. Torches flickered in iron sconces, throwing his profile into sharp planes, strong jaw, stern mouth, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if he were marching into battle, not toward his wedding bed. The guards stopped at a pair of carved doors banded with iron. One of them bowed. May the goddess bless your bond, your majesty. Leave us, Jonathan said. The doors closed behind us with a heavy, final thud. Silence swallowed the room. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The chambers were larger than my entire childhood home. A fire burned in the hearth, throwing warmth over fur rugs and dark wood. The bed dominated the space, an enormous thing draped in blue and silver, its carved posts twined with wolves and moon blossoms. Someone had scattered white petals across the sheets, as if softness could disguise what was supposed to happen here. My heart thudded against my ribs. I could feel his presence beside me like a storm held on a leash. Jonathan stepped away first. Without a word, he crossed to a sideboard, uncorked a crystal decanter, and poured deep red wine into 2 goblets. His movements were precise, controlled, like a man performing a ritual he had rehearsed 1,000 times. He brought 1 goblet to me. "Drink," he said. "You've had a long day." His voice held no tenderness, but no cruelty either. Just exhaustion, scraped raw. My fingers brushed his as I took the cup. A spark shot up my arm, sharp enough to make me catch my breath. The first whisper of the bond, the elders would have called it. The goddess tying a string between 2 unwilling hearts. He felt it too. I saw the flicker in his eyes before he turned away. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "Only a few hundred." "Why me?" I asked, because it was the only one that mattered. Jonathan leaned against the edge of the table, the fire painting his armor in shades of blood and gold. He did not look at me when he answered. "Because your bloodline is old and untainted by outside alliances. Because your scent tells every wolf in this fortress, you are an Omega capable of carrying a strong heir. Because your family has no army left to leverage you with. And because there are those in this court who would see you dead for your father's crimes if I did not take you under my protection." The words landed like stones. "So I am convenient," I said quietly, "and somewhat useful." His gaze finally lifted to mine. There was no mockery there, only a bleak sort of honesty. "Yes." I sipped the wine to hide the way my throat tightened. It tasted rich and dark, nothing like the thin village red I'd shared with the schoolmaster on winter feast days. "You don't have to pretend this is anything else," he added. "I won't insult you with lies about fate and romance. You chose me to keep me alive," I said, "and to put my womb between you and your enemies." "Blunt," he murmured. "Your father was the same." I stiffened. "You knew him." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "I knew of him, and I know now that the trial against him was flawed. Flawed. Such a gentle word for the day my world ended. "Then why is he still dead?" I whispered. "Because I was not king then." His voice hardened, an edge of fury directed at something far beyond me. "And because some things cannot be undone." Only answered. Silence stretched between us, taut and fragile. The fire popped in the hearth. "You should know," he said at last, "that this arrangement is necessity, not desire." The words cut cleanly, more precise than any blade. "I didn't expect desire," I managed. "Only duty." "Good." He set his goblet down with deliberate care. "Then we understand each other." He shrugged out of his armor, piece by piece, the clink of metal loud in the quiet room. Underneath, he wore a simple linen shirt, the fabric stretched across broad shoulders marked with scars that disappeared beneath the collar. I found myself staring, not because he was beautiful though he was, but because every mark on his skin was a story I did not know. Wounds taken for this kingdom, for a crown I had never wanted any part of. 3 years ago, he said, not looking at me, my mate Alara died in this room. The air seemed to thin. She was with child, he went on. Our first. The healers said the birth would be difficult. They were wrong. His hands curled briefly into fists, then relaxed. She bled out on those sheets while I held her hand and promised her everything would be all right. His gaze flicked to the bed. I followed it, despite myself. The petals looked different now. Like a shroud. I swore that night, Jonathan said slowly, that I would never love again, that I would never bring another Omega into this bed and ask her to risk her life for a line of kings who seemed determined to die young. He turned back to me. Whatever emotion had been in his voice was gone from his face. I will fulfill my duty to this kingdom, he said. I will provide an heir, but I will not lie to you, Saray. I will not press you for tenderness that I have nothing to offer in return. It should have been a gift, that distance. Better than the stories of kings who forced themselves on unwilling mates, who mistook power for right. Instead, the words slid under my skin and found every raw place I'd been hiding. "So you will not touch me," I said. "Not tonight. Not until it becomes unavoidable," he replied. "The council expects a consummation. They will watch you closely for signs of conception. When the time comes, we will do what is required. No more, no less." The sting of rejection burned, hot and unexpected. Even as a disgraced Omega, I had thought foolishly that a king might at least want what he took, that if I was to be a sacrifice, I would be devoured, not politely set aside like an unwanted offering. "I see," I said. He studied me, eyes narrowing slightly. "This is not about you. I know." I forced a thin smile. Everything about me stopped being mine the day my father was dragged to the block. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. Regret, respect, pity. I didn't want any of them. He gestured toward a screen near the hearth. "There is water prepared if you wish to wash away the ceremony. I will give you privacy. You don't have to leave your own chambers," I said. His mouth quirked, the closest thing to a smile I had seen on him. It didn't reach his eyes. "They stopped being mine the moment I put a crown on my head," he answered. "Good night, Saray." He took his wine and retreated to a smaller adjoining room, closing the door with a quiet click. For a long time, I just stood there, goblet cradled in numb fingers, staring at the bed that had witnessed one queen's death and now waited for another woman to lie down and pretend she wasn't afraid. Eventually, I moved. The bathing chamber was warm and dim, steam curling from a copper tub scented with herbs. I stripped out of the ceremonial gown, careful not to tear the fabric. It wasn't mine. After all, nothing here was. As I sank into the water, my reflection wavered. The torches turned my skin to pale gold, my hair to a tangle of dark silk. Somewhere under all that, I was still the village teacher who smelled of ink and chalk dust and muddy boots. "I should be grateful," I whispered to the empty room. He didn't force me. He didn't touch me. The words were true. So, why did they feel like another kind of punishment? Because some bitter, foolish part of me had wanted to be wanted, to know that, for even one night, I was something more than a convenient womb and a political shield. When I returned to the bedchamber, the fire had burned lower. I slipped between the cool sheets, drawing the covers up to my chin. The side nearest the door remained untouched, smooth and unrumpled. A canyon of silk yawned between where I lay and where he would have lain, if this were a different story. Through the thin wall, I heard the faint clink of glass, the low murmur of a man speaking to no one, perhaps to the memory of a woman who had died 3 years ago, perhaps to the ghosts of choices he wished he'd made differently. I turned onto my back and stared at the carved canopy overhead. Would this distance make surviving easier? If he never reached for me, never offered anything beyond duty and protection, perhaps I could keep my heart out of the bargain. Or perhaps loneliness was just another blade, slower than the executioner's axe but just as deadly. Sleep came in ragged fragments, broken by dreams of blood on stone and a crown too heavy for anyone to bear. Each time I woke, the other side of the bed was still empty. The king who would not touch me was only a few steps away. And somehow, that hurt more than if he had already broken me. For 2 weeks, the fortress tasted like rust and judgment. Every morning, a maid laced me into gowns that did not feel like mine and fastened a silver crown into my hair. Every morning, I stepped out into corridors where conversations died at my approach, like candles snuffed one by one. "Traitor's daughter," someone would murmur when they thought I was too far away to hear. "Pretty enough, I suppose," another voice would answer. "Shame about the blood." I learned to walk as if the whispers bounced off my skin. Chin high, shoulders straight, hands folded loosely at my waist so no one could see how tightly I curled them into my palms. They called me Her Majesty with their mouths. Their eyes called me something else. Court duties multiplied like weeds. Audiences, petitions, endless small rituals meant to show a united, unshakable throne. Jonathan and I moved through them like actors in a play, his hand at the small of my back, my smile just wide enough. We spoke the right words, offered the right blessings, accepted the right oaths. In public, we were perfect. In private, our bed remained divided by that same canyon of silk. The worst of it was the dinners. The great hall glittered each night, crystal goblets catching firelight, polished armor gleaming behind the high table, nobles draped in wealth and power. I sat to Jonathan's right, close enough to feel the heat of him, to smell clean leather and pine and the faint metallic tang of steel, but not close enough to forget that there was still distance between us. They toasted to the goddess, to the kingdom, to the promise of heirs. No one toasted to the queen. On the 14th night, Lady Miriam decided to stop pretending her contempt was anything but personal. It began with a question about harvests from the southern valleys. I answered carefully, repeating what I'd learned from the stewards. Numbers, yields, trade routes. My voice stayed steady. A few nobles looked faintly surprised that I knew anything at all. Then Miriam's goblet clicked against the table, sharp as a dropped knife. "Fascinating," she said. "Our new queen is so very informed." Her tone made the word sound like something she'd found on the underside of her shoe. I set my cup down, keeping my fingers loose. The stewards explained things clearly. I'm still learning. Learning. She smiled, all teeth. Yes, I suppose one must. When one's education is interrupted by an inconvenient public execution. The hall went quiet in a slow, rippling wave. My breath stalled. Every eye turned to me, to us. Jonathan's hand, which had been resting casually near his plate, went absolutely still. Miriam leaned forward slightly, addressing the table more than me. But perhaps treachery leaves its own kind of mark. Blood remembers, does it not? It would be naive to assume a traitor's daughter could simply shed such tendencies because she now wears a crown. The word traitor landed like a slap. I felt it, and so did everyone else. A younger lord at the far end shifted uncomfortably, as if he'd just realized he was standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Someone coughed. No one spoke. I could have swallowed it. I had swallowed worse. But something in me, some stubborn piece that hadn't died with my father, lifted its head. My father's mistakes are buried with him, I said quietly. The only thing my blood remembers is how it felt to watch him die. A few of the younger nobles dropped their gazes. Miriam did not. Are you suggesting the king's justice was in error? She asked silkily. How bold. The trap yawned open beneath my feet. If I said yes, I would be accusing the crown of wrongdoing his crown. If I said no, I was agreeing my father had deserved the block. I opened my mouth, not sure which lie would come out. Jonathan stood. He didn't slam his goblet or shout. He didn't need to. The simple act of rising from his chair sent a shockwave down the table. Conversations snapped off. Chairs scraped as those nearest him half rose in unconscious deference. The guards at the walls straightened. Enough, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Miriam turned, eyes narrowing. Your Majesty, anyone who questions the Queen's place at this table, Jonathan continued, questions mine. The air seemed to crystallize around us. She sits here by my choice, he went on, each word precise as a strike. She wears that crown because I put it on her head. Her blood, her name, her past, they are all under my protection. If you call her loyalty into doubt, you call mine into doubt as well. He let the words hang for a heartbeat. I do not tolerate challenges to my authority, he finished softly. Not from enemies. Not from family. Not from anyone. Miriam's face went pale beneath her carefully applied paint. For the first time since I met her, she looked less like a queen's sister and more like a woman who had misjudged the limits of her own power. I meant no disrespect, she said stiffly. I merely... You spoke out of grief, he allowed. I will forgive it once. Do not force me to do so again. The threat in that gentle sentence made even me shiver. Around us, the nobles stared at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their food. No one met anyone's eyes. The hall, moments ago buzzing with idle gossip, dropped into a thick, nervous silence. Jonathan sat back down, the movement controlled, but his hand found my knee beneath the table. His fingers curled there, warm and solid, the grip just this side of possessive. For the first time since the ceremony, I felt something like safety. The rest of the meal passed in strained, careful conversation. Miriam did not speak to me again. No one else mentioned my father. When the final course was cleared and the musicians shifted into something softer, Jonathan rose and offered me his arm. Walk with me, he said. It wasn't a request. We left the hall through a side door, avoiding the main corridor where courtiers would pounce with questions and apologies and thinly veiled criticisms. The route he chose wound through quieter passages lit by fewer torches, the stone cool under our feet. His hand stayed at the small of my back, guiding me, steadying me. "You didn't have to do that," I said when we were finally alone. "Yes," he replied, "I did." We reached his chambers. He opened the door, gestured for me to enter first, then followed and shut us in with a soft click. The fire was already burning, shadows dancing over the familiar furniture, the too large bed, the table where he'd once told me he would never love again. Tonight, he didn't reach for the decanter. Instead, he went to the hearth, braced one arm against the stone, and exhaled a long, rough breath. "I should have anticipated it," he said. "Miriam's attack. She is grieving," I offered, because it was easier than admitting how deeply her words had cut. "She lost her sister. Now she's lost whatever place she thought she had at your side. Grief made people cruel. I knew that better than most. She knows the difference between grief and treason," he said. "She chose to use the latter as a weapon against you." Something hot and unfamiliar curled in my chest. "You were angry," I said slowly, testing the shape of it. "Not just for the insult to your authority. For me." He turned then, and the look in his eyes nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. "Of course I was," he said simply. "You did nothing to deserve that attack. You have done nothing but try to learn a world that was forced on you. No one else sees it that way. I am not no one else." The words settled between us, heavy and unexpected. He crossed the space to the chairs near the fire and sank into one, gesturing to the other. "Sit. I find that if we are to survive this court, we should at least know who we are enduring it with." A smile tugged at my mouth despite everything. "Is that your way of saying you want to know me, Your Majesty?" His lips curved, just barely. "I'm saying I've heard enough of who the court thinks you are. I would like to hear who you believe yourself to be." No one with power had ever asked me that. I sat. For a while, I didn't know where to begin. My life before the execution felt like someone else's story entirely. Ballrooms and tutors and a father who smelled of ink and parchment, not blood. So I started with the village. I told him about the school with its crooked windows and drafty roof. About Lila, who'd cried the day she wrote her name without help. About Tomas, who'd sworn reading was for nobles until he discovered adventure tales and then devoured every scroll he could get his hands on. About the way their eyes lit when letters stopped being symbols and became doorways. I thought teaching them would kill me at first, I admitted. It felt like penance to have fallen so far. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being punishment and became purpose. Jonathan listened without interrupting, elbows on his knees, hands tented loosely. The firelight threw gold into his dark eyes, softened the harsh lines of his face. "You took the wreckage of your life and built something useful from it," he said when I fell silent. "Most nobles I know would have drowned in their own bitterness." "I did," I said, "for a while, and then you learned to swim." His gaze held mine. "I see more in you than your father's mistakes, Saray." The words hit harder than Miriam's insults. Because I believed her. I was still struggling to believe him. "Careful," I said lightly, trying to deflect the sudden ache in my chest. "If you keep speaking kindly, I might forget this is only political necessity." He smiled then. A real one this time. Brief and startling and devastating. "Let's call it political necessity," he said, "with the possibility of adjustments." "Adjustments," I echoed. "That sounds ominous." "Hopeful," he corrected softly. My breath caught. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the space between us humming with something that felt different than duty, different than reluctant alliance. The first whisper of something fragile and dangerous and new. When he stood and took the step that closed that space, I didn't move away. My heart pounded, but not with fear. His hand rose, calloused fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. He hesitated, as if giving me time to pull back. I didn't. His knuckles traced my cheekbone feather-light. "If you don't want this," he murmured, "tell me now." For the first time since I entered this fortress, I realized I had the power to say no and be heard. I didn't use it. "I want to know what this is," I whispered, at least once without an audience. Something in his eyes broke open. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind. And when his mouth finally met mine, it wasn't a claiming. It was a question. I answered with trembling hands fisting in the front of his shirt, with the soft, startled sound that escaped when he deepened the kiss, with the way I leaned into him as if he were the only solid thing in a world built on shifting stone. When we finally parted, both breathing harder, his forehead rested against mine. "This," he said quietly, "is not duty." "No," I agreed, my voice unsteady. "It's worse." His brows drew together. "Worse?" "Dangerous," I corrected, "because I don't know how to survive it." His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, where his kiss still burned. "Then we'll learn together," he said. And for the first time since my father died, I let myself believe that something real might grow in the cracks left by everything I'd lost. The kiss changed everything, not in some sudden, dramatic way. There was no lightning strike, no divine proclamation from the goddess. Instead, the change crept in slowly, like dawn bleeding over a stubborn horizon. The next evening, Jonathan knocked on my door instead of retreating to his study. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the chairs by my hearth. I blinked, still adjusting to the idea that he was asking permission to enter his own fortress. Of course. He brought wine and 2 goblets, settling into the chair opposite mine with the careful ease of someone testing fragile ground. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched the fire, letting the silence stretch without forcing it into words. Then he noticed the book on the side table, a worn copy of old fables I'd used to teach the children. "Read to me," he said. I almost laughed. "You want me to read children's stories to the Alpha King?" His mouth curved slightly. "I want to hear why you chose them." So I did. I read about clever foxes and brave mice and wolves who learned that strength without honor was just another word for ruin. Between stories, I explained how each one taught the children something they needed: courage, kindness, the difference between cruelty and justice. Jonathan listened like he'd never heard anything more important. When I finished, he leaned back, gaze distant. "My tutors taught me strategy and bloodlines. No one ever mentioned foxes. Maybe they should have," I said softly. He smiled then, a real one, and something in my chest loosened. The evenings became ritual. He would arrive after the evening meal, sometimes with wine, sometimes with nothing but his presence and the stories he'd begun to share. Stories of a boy forced into armor before he understood what it meant to carry a sword. Of a father who believed affection was weakness and trained his sons accordingly. Of a crown that had always felt more like a shackle than a birthright. "I never wanted this," he admitted one night, staring into his goblet as if it held answers. "The throne, the endless politics, the knowledge that every decision I make will be written in someone's blood. Then why keep it?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because someone must. And if I walk away, the men who would take my place are worse." There was no arrogance in the words, only exhaustion. I reached across the space between our chairs and touched his hand. He turned his palm up, threading his fingers through mine. We sat like that until the fire burned low. The touches came easier after that. His hand at my elbow when we descended stairs, my fingers brushing his wrist during council meetings when I needed steadying. Small, tentative gestures that spoke louder than declarations. When we walked the fortress gardens, stone paths winding through winter bare hedges and frost-touched roses, his hand found mine without hesitation, warm and solid and sure. The servants noticed. The court whispered. Let them, I thought. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't invisible. We shared his bed now, not because duty demanded it, but because neither of us wanted to sleep alone anymore. He would pull me against his chest, his breath warm against my hair, and I would fit myself into the curve of his body like I'd been made for exactly that space. The mating bond began to form. I felt it first as warmth low in my belly, a golden thread tugging gently between us, then as something deeper, a hum in my blood when he entered a room, a pull that made distance feel wrong, a certainty that settled into my bones like marrow. The goddess was tying us together whether we'd asked for it or not. Terrifying, inevitable, undeniable. Do you feel it? I whispered one night, tracing the scars on his shoulder. His hand covered mine. Yes. Does it frighten you? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said again. But not for the reasons it should. I understood what he meant. We weren't afraid of the bond itself. We were afraid of what would happen if we let ourselves believe in it, and then lost each other anyway. The festival of the goddess arrived on the first full moon of winter. The courtyard transformed into something out of legend, torches casting golden light over fresh snow, musicians playing soft, haunting melodies, courtiers dressed in silver and white to honor the moon's blessing. Jonathan appeared at my side, devastatingly handsome in dark formal attire, and offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Not a command, a request. I placed my hand in his. He led me to the center of the courtyard, where space opened around us like water parting. Every eye tracked our movement. I should have felt exposed, hunted. Instead, when Jonathan's arm slid around my waist and pulled me close, the rest of the world blurred. We moved together as if we'd done this 1,000 times, his hand firm at my back, mine resting on his shoulder, our steps perfectly matched. "They're watching us," I murmured. "Let them," he said, echoing my own earlier thought. "Let them see that you are mine and I am yours, and that neither of us is ashamed of it." My breath hitched. "Jonathan, say it," he interrupted softly, his gaze holding mine. "Tell me you feel this too." The bond thrummed between us, golden and insistent. "I feel it," I whispered. "I feel you." He spun me gently, and when I came back into his arms, he held me tighter, closer, like I was something precious he'd finally stopped pretending he didn't want. For the first time since my father's death, I felt like I might deserve happiness, like I might deserve him. Then I saw Lord Garrett watching from the shadows. His expression was cold, calculating, the look of a predator assessing weakness. When our eyes met, his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, a warning. The dance ended. Jonathan kissed my knuckles, lingering just long enough to send heat racing up my arm. Then a general approached with urgent news about border patrols, and Jonathan squeezed my hand apologetically before stepping away. I should have followed him. Instead, Garrett moved like smoke, closing the distance before I could retreat. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head just enough to mock the formality. Such a touching display. "Lord Garrett," I kept my voice steady. "I didn't realize you were attending." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world." His smile sharpened. "Watching a king fall in love is always illuminating." The word love landed like a blow. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell wine and something sour underneath. "A word of advice, little queen. Traitors' daughters who forget their place tend to have accidents." Ice slid down my spine. "And kings who love their mates," he continued softly, "become kings with weaknesses, exploitable ones." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, proud when my voice didn't shake. His eyes glittered. "I'm educating you. There's a difference." Then he stepped back, bowed with exaggerated courtesy, and melted into the crowd before I could summon the guards. I found Jonathan within minutes, pulling him aside into an empty corridor. The words spilled out Garrett's approach, the veiled threat, the promise of accidents. The change in Jonathan was immediate and terrifying. His entire body went rigid, eyes darkening to something feral and dangerous. For a heartbeat, I saw the wolf beneath the king, teeth bared, hackles raised, ready to tear apart anyone who dared touch what was his. "He said that to you?" Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a blade scraping stone. "He threatened you to your face?" He was careful with his words. I don't care how careful he was. He turned on his heel, already moving. "I will have him arrested, tried, executed if necessary." I caught his arm. "Jonathan, wait. If you act rashly, he wins. He wants you emotional, distracted." He threatened my mate. The words came out rough, possessive, absolute. There is no world in which I ignore that. My mate. Not my political arrangement. Not my convenient omega. My mate. Something inside me cracked open. He called for his captain of the guard, issuing orders in clipped, furious tones. Guards stationed at my chambers. Restrictions on my movements. No one allowed near me without his explicit permission. When the captain left, Jonathan turned back to me, chest heaving, fury still burning in his eyes. "I will not lose you," he said. "Do you understand? I have already buried one mate. I will burn this kingdom to ash before I do it again." I touched his face, felt the tension vibrating through him. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. He pulled me against him, arms wrapping around me so tightly I could barely breathe. But I didn't want to. I wanted to be held like this, like I mattered, like losing me would break something essential in him. "There's something else," he said into my hair. "Something I should have told you sooner." I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "What?" His jaw worked. "I've been investigating your father's treason case. The evidence against him was flawed, convenient, too perfect." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I believe he was framed," Jonathan said quietly. "And I'm saying I will find proof. I will restore your family's name, Saray. I swear it on the goddess herself." The world tilted. All these years, I'd carried my father's guilt like a weight around my neck, apologized for existing, made myself small so no one would remember whose blood ran in my veins. And Jonathan, this king who'd pulled me onto his lap in front of the entire court, believed my father might have been innocent. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" He cupped my face, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "Because you deserve the truth," he said. "And because I am falling in love with you, and I refuse to let lies define what we could become." The bond flared between us, golden and blazing. I kissed him then, desperately, pouring everything I couldn't say into the press of my mouth against his. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. "Not in separate rooms, not with distance between us. Just stay. Always," I whispered back. And as he led me through the fortress toward our chambers, guards flanking us, the bond singing between us like a vow, I realized something terrifying and wonderful. I was falling too, and there was no going back. 6 weeks after the ceremony, the court prepared to celebrate something that hadn't yet happened: the promise of an heir. The formal dinner gleamed with excess silver platters piled with roasted game, crystal goblets catching candlelight, nobles dressed in their finest silks and furs. At the high table, I sat beside Jonathan, acutely aware of every whispered speculation about whether I'd quickened yet, whether the bond had taken root in more than just our hearts. The gown they'd dressed me in was deep blue, the color of midnight water, with silver embroidery that caught the light when I moved. Jonathan hadn't been able to look away since I'd entered the hall. "You're staring," I murmured behind my goblet. His mouth curved. "I'm appreciating." Heat crept up my neck. After 6 weeks, his attention still made me feel like I was standing too close to a fire, dangerous and intoxicating and impossible to resist. A servant approached with a crystal decanter, ornate and clearly ceremonial. "For Her Majesty," he announced, bowing low. "A special vintage, blessed by the temple, to honor the Omega Queen and the hope of new life." The court murmured approval. A few nobles raised their glasses in anticipation. Jonathan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "You don't have to drink it if you'd rather not." I smiled. "It's tradition. I'm not going to insult the goddess over wine." The servant poured, the liquid dark as blood in the firelight. I lifted the goblet, met Jonathan's eyes, and drank. It tasted normal at first, rich, slightly sweet, with the tang of blackberries. I set the cup down, reached for a piece of bread, and tried to ignore the way everyone seemed to be watching me. Then the room tilted. Not violently, just wrong, like the floor had shifted an inch to the left and my body hadn't caught up. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The candles blurred into smears of gold, voices stretched and distorted. "Saray?" Jonathan's voice came from somewhere far away. I opened my mouth to answer, but pain exploded through my chest, white-hot, searing, like someone had driven a blade between my ribs and twisted. I gasped, clutching the table. The goblet tipped, spilling dark wine across the white cloth like blood. "Saray." The world fractured into sharp, disjointed pieces, faces looming over me. Shouting, hands grabbing, the ground rushing up too fast. Jonathan caught me before I hit the stone floor. His face swam into focus above me, terror stark in his eyes. "Get the healers, now." Someone was screaming orders, boots pounded. I tried to speak, to tell him I was fine, but my tongue wouldn't obey. The pain ripped through me again, and everything went dark. I woke in fragments. A soft bed beneath me, bitter herbs burning nearby, voices murmuring prayers to the goddess. And through it all, one constant. Jonathan's hand wrapped around mine, solid and unyielding, as if he could anchor me to life through sheer will alone. Wolfsbane in the wine, lethal to Omegas. Don't know if she'll survive the night. The words drifted through fever dreams where my father stood at the execution block, and Jonathan's face blurred into his, both of them telling me I didn't belong, that I'd been a fool to believe I could outrun my blood. Sometimes I surfaced enough to feel Jonathan's lips pressed to my fevered forehead, his voice rough and broken. "Come back to me, please, Saray, come back." Other times, the darkness pulled me under, and I let it. On what must have been the second day, or maybe the third, time had stopped making sense. I heard him speaking as if from the bottom of a well. "I didn't think I could do this again," he was saying. "Watch someone His voice cracked. Alara died in my arms, and I swore I'd never let myself care enough to hurt like that again. But you, goddess, you're everything I didn't know I needed. You're sharp and brave and stubborn, and you see me, not just the crown. You make me believe I could be something other than what my father tried to forge me into." A pause. The sound of his breathing, ragged and unsteady. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you, and I'm terrified that I realized it too late, that the goddess gave me a second chance, and I wasted too much time pretending distance would keep us safe." His thumb brushed across my knuckles, so gentle it hurt. "You're my true mate," he continued, voice breaking. "The bond knew it before I did, and losing you now," he exhaled shakily, "it would destroy me in ways losing Alara never did, because what we have is real. We chose this. We chose each other." I wanted to answer, to tell him I loved him too, that I wasn't going anywhere, but the darkness swallowed me again before I could find the words. When I finally woke, truly woke, the room was dim and quiet. My mouth tasted like ash. My body ached as if I'd been trampled, but I was alive. I turned my head, slow and careful, and found Jonathan asleep in the chair beside my bed. His hair was disheveled, his formal clothes rumpled and stained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hand still gripped mine, even in sleep, like he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. "Jonathan," I whispered. His eyes flew open instantly, and for a heartbeat, he just stared at me as if I were a ghost he didn't dare believe in. Then relief crashed across his face, so raw and overwhelming it stole my breath. "Saray." My name came out broken. He surged forward, cupping my face with trembling hands. "Goddess, you're awake. I tried to smile. "Still here." He kissed me then, desperate and fierce and shaking, like he was trying to convince himself I was real. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I heard you," I said softly. "While I was, wherever I was, I heard what you said." He went very still. "Saray, you love me," I continued, my voice hoarse but steady. "You think I'm your true mate, and you were terrified you'd figured it out too late." For a moment, I thought he might deny it, might retreat back into that careful distance we'd started with. Instead, he pressed his forehead to mine and exhaled a shaky breath. "I meant every word," he said. "I love you. I choose you. And I will burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let anyone hurt you again." Tears slipped down my cheeks, and I didn't try to stop them. "I love you too," I whispered. "I think I have since you pulled me onto your lap and your hand trembled. Since you defended me in front of the court. Since you asked me to read to you and listened like my stories mattered." His thumb brushed away my tears. "They did matter. You matter. Then don't let go," I said. "Never." He kissed me again, softer this time, reverent. "You're mine, Saray. My mate. My queen. My everything. And I swear on the goddess and every star in the sky, I will find who did this and make them answer for it." The promise in his voice was iron and blood. I believed him. A healer entered then, startled to find me awake, and bustled forward with questions and examinations. Jonathan refused to move more than a step away, his hand never leaving mine. "Wolfsbane," the healer confirmed grimly. "In the ceremonial wine. If you'd drunk more, Your Majesty, you wouldn't have survived the first hour." Jonathan's grip tightened, his jaw working. "Do we know who?" I asked. The healer glanced at Jonathan, who nodded permission. "The servant who poured the wine has disappeared," she said carefully. "But the decanter was traced back to certain parties who stand to gain from destabilizing the throne." Garrett, I thought. It had to be. Jonathan's expression went cold and deadly. "Then we will find them. And when we do, they will learn what happens when they threaten what's mine." He turned back to me, and the coldness melted into something warmer, fiercer. "Rest now," he murmured, brushing hair back from my forehead. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you wake." "Promise?" I whispered, exhaustion already pulling at me. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Always." As I drifted back toward sleep, this time healing, not dying, I felt the bond between us pulse like a heartbeat, golden and unbreakable. We had chosen each other. And nothing, not poison, not politics, not the ghosts of the past would tear us apart. I'd been out of the healing chambers for less than a day when the horn sounded. 3 sharp blasts, the signal for an armed force approaching the gates. Not an army, but enough men to make a statement. Jonathan was at my side instantly, his hand going to the blade at his hip. "Stay here! What's happening?" His jaw tightened. "Garrett is making his move." By the time we reached the throne room, it was already filling with nobles, guards, and generals, all of them tense and armed. I shouldn't have been there. I was still weak, still recovering, but Jonathan hadn't argued when I'd followed him. He knew I needed to see this. The doors burst open. Lord Garrett strode in, flanked by 24 mercenaries in mismatched armor, along with a handful of nobles whose faces I recognized from dinners where they'd whispered about my blood. His expression was cold triumph, the look of a man who believed he'd already won. "Alpha King Jonathan," Garrett announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I come to challenge your fitness to rule." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Jonathan descended the dais slowly, each step measured and deliberate. I stayed at the top, fingers gripping the arm of the throne to keep myself upright. "You come armed into my fortress," Jonathan said quietly, "with hired swords and traitors at your back, and you speak of fitness to rule?" Garrett smiled. "I speak of a king who cannot protect his own mate, who lets her be poisoned under his roof, in his hall, while he sits blind and useless." The words hit like stones. Jonathan's hands flexed at his sides, but his voice remained steady. "You know a great deal about that poison, Garrett, almost as if you arranged it yourself. Prove it," Garrett shot back. "Or admit that your reign has grown weak, that you've let sentiment cloud your judgment, that you've chosen a traitor's daughter over the stability of this kingdom." He turned to address the gathered nobles. "A king who loves is a king with a weakness," he declared. "And weaknesses get exploited, get people killed. This court deserves a ruler who puts the throne above his own desires." Murmurs spread through the room, some agreeing, others uncertain. Jonathan's general stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Your Majesty, say the word and we'll cut them down where they stand." "No," Jonathan said. The general froze. "Your Majesty." "He wants me to act like a tyrant," Jonathan continued, still looking at Garrett, "to prove his point by executing him without trial. I will not give him that satisfaction." Garrett's smile widened. "Then you give me this. Single combat. You and me, witnessed by the court and the goddess. If you win, I leave and never return. If I win," he paused for effect, "you abdicate, and I take the throne." The room erupted. "He's bluffing. This is treason. You can't seriously be considering." Jonathan raised one hand, and silence fell like a blade. "I accept." "No." The word tore out of me before I could stop it. Every head turned. I descended the dais on shaking legs, barely managing not to stumble. Jonathan caught my elbow, steadying me. "You can't do this," I said, low and urgent. "He'll kill you, or you'll kill him, and it'll make you look like a king who defends what's his." Jonathan finished softly. He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Trust me." "I do trust you. That's not—" My voice broke. "I just got you back. I can't lose you now." Something in his expression gentled. "You won't. I promise you, Saray, I will come back." "You can't promise that." His thumb brushed my cheek. "You gave me something worth fighting for. That makes me more dangerous than he'll ever be." "Behind us," Garrett laughed. "How touching. But we have an audience, Your Majesty. Shall we stop wasting their time?" Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he turned back to the room. "Dawn," he declared. "The courtyard, witnessed by all." Garrett inclined his head in mock courtesy. "I look forward to it." The hours until dawn were the longest of my life. Jonathan spent them with his generals, reviewing what little intelligence they had on Garrett's fighting style. I sat in the corner of the strategy room, wrapped in furs, and tried not to let terror consume me. When the sky finally began to pale, we walked together to the courtyard. The entire court had gathered nobles in their finery, guards lining the walls, servants crowding windows and balconies. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the stones in a thin white layer that would soon be stained red. Jonathan stripped off his formal jacket, standing in just shirt sleeves and leather trousers, a sword in his hand. Across from him, Garrett did the same, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for slaughter. The high priestess stepped between them, her voice carrying in the cold morning air. Single combat, witnessed by the goddess. The victor's claim will be recognized. Let no one interfere, on pain of death. She withdrew. Jonathan glanced back at me one last time. I tried to send everything I couldn't say through the bond, my love, my faith, my desperate plea for him to survive this. He nodded once. Then the fight began. It was brutal from the first clash of steel. Garrett moved like a predator, all speed and calculated strikes, aiming for weak points with surgical precision. Jonathan met him blow for blow, his movements controlled but powerful, each swing deliberate. They circled each other in the snow, breath misting, boots slipping on ice and stone. Garrett lunged. Jonathan blocked, twisted, drove his shoulder into Garrett's chest. They broke apart, both breathing hard. You've gotten slow, Garrett taunted. Love does that to a man. Jonathan didn't answer. He just attacked. The fight intensified, a blur of steel and fury. Blood appeared, darkening Jonathan's sleeve. Then Garrett's leg. The courtyard fell into breathless silence, every eye riveted on the two men fighting for the throne. For me. Garrett fought with skill and ruthlessness, but Jonathan fought with something deeper, something fiercer. He fought like a man who had everything to lose. When Garrett lunged for a killing blow blade aimed straight at Jonathan's heart, Jonathan moved. He sidestepped, faster than should have been possible, and his hand shot out. He caught Garrett's wrist, twisted hard, and the sword flew from Garrett's grip, clattering across the stones. Before Garrett could recover, Jonathan's blade was at his throat. The courtyard held its breath. Garrett froze, eyes wide, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. Do it, he hissed. Make yourself the monster you're so afraid of being. Jonathan's hand didn't shake. I am not my father, he said quietly. And I am not you. He withdrew the blade and stepped back. You are banished from this kingdom, Jonathan declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. Effective immediately. If you ever set foot on this land again, the sentence will be death. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Garrett stared at him, something like confusion flickering across his face. But first, Jonathan continued, reaching into his shirt and pulling out a folded parchment. The court will hear the truth. He held up the document. 5 years ago, Lord Garrett framed Saray's father for treason. He falsified evidence, bribed witnesses, and orchestrated the execution of an innocent man, all to eliminate a political rival who stood in the way of his ambition. Shocked silence. I have the proof, Jonathan said. Signed confessions from 2 of Garrett's co-conspirators, financial records showing payments made to false witnesses, and a letter, in Garrett's own hand, detailing the plan. He turned to me, and the look in his eyes nearly broke me. Saray of House Velinor is not a traitor's daughter, he declared. Her father was innocent. Her family name is cleared, and anyone who questions her place at my side will answer to me. The courtyard erupted. Some nobles looked stunned, others horrified. A few were already whispering, recalculating their allegiances now that the truth had been laid bare. Garrett's face twisted with rage. You think this changes anything? She is my mate, Jonathan interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. My queen. And the woman I would tear this kingdom apart to protect. You tried to poison her. You tried to use her father's name as a weapon against her. You failed. He gestured to the guards. Take him. Escort him to the border. If he resists, you have my permission to use force. Garrett was dragged away, still snarling threats, but no one was listening anymore. The court's attention had shifted to me. Jonathan crossed the courtyard in long strides, ignoring his bleeding arm, and pulled me into his arms. It's done, he murmured into my hair. You're free, Saray. Your name is restored. I couldn't speak. I just held him, shaking with relief and disbelief and a grief I hadn't let myself feel in 5 years. My father had been innocent. All this time, I'd carried shame that was never mine to bear. Thank you, I finally whispered. Jonathan pulled back just enough to cut my face. You never have to thank me for telling the truth. Around us, the court began to kneel, first the guards, then the generals, then the nobles, one by one, until the entire courtyard was bowed before us. Not just to the king, to both of us. Jonathan took my hand and raised it high. Behold your queen, he declared. Saray of House Velenor, daughter of an innocent man, my true mate, and the woman who will stand beside me as we rebuild this kingdom into something worthy of her. The cheers that erupted shook the very stones of the fortress. And for the first time since I'd been dragged here in chains of duty, I stood in the light and believed I deserved to be seen. The days after Garrett's banishment felt like waking from a long, suffocating dream. Nobles who had once whispered about my father's crimes now bowed when I passed, their eyes meeting mine with something that looked almost like respect. Servants who'd avoided me competed to bring me tea, to ask if my chambers needed tending, to offer small kindnesses they'd withheld before. The change was dizzying. On the third day, Lady Miriam requested an audience. I almost refused. The memory of her contempt at that dinner still burned. But something in the way the servant phrased the request softly, almost pleading, made me agree. She arrived in my chambers dressed simply, her usual sharp elegance muted. For a long moment, she just stood there, hands folded, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I owe you an apology, she said finally. I gestured to the chairs by the fire. She sat stiffly, as if the act of humility pained her. I judged you unfairly, she continued, not meeting my eyes. I let grief poison me into cruelty. Your father's name, your bloodline. I used them as weapons because I was angry that Jonathan had chosen to move forward, that he'd chosen you. She finally looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion there, the weight of years spent mourning a sister who would never come back. Alara would have hated what I became, Miriam said quietly. She always believed in second chances, in forgiveness. She would have wanted Jonathan to find happiness again. Her voice broke slightly. She would have liked you. Something in my chest loosened. Thank you, I said softly, for telling me that. She nodded, rising to leave, but paused at the door. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. Stronger than most of us. Don't let this court make you forget that. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the firelight and the strange, fragile hope that perhaps I could truly belong here. A week later, Jonathan summoned the entire realm to the fortress. We're doing this properly, he'd said, pulling me against him in the early morning light. No more half measures, no more pretending this is anything less than what it is. The throne room gleamed with preparation. Banners bearing my family crest, the one I hadn't seen in 5 years, hung alongside the royal standard. The high priestess stood before the dais, and every noble, every merchant, every citizen who could fit inside the hall packed the space until it felt like the stones themselves might burst. Jonathan led me forward, his hand warm and steady around mine. The priestess raised her arms. We gather to witness the true union of Alpha King Jonathan and his mate Saray of House Velenor. My family name, spoken aloud without shame for the first time since my father's death. I felt tears prick my eyes. By the power vested in me by the goddess, the priestess continued, I declare the charges against House Velenor false and void. The honor, title, and lands of that noble house are hereby restored. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Jonathan turned to me, and the look in his eyes stole my breath. Saray, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. You are not just my mate. You are my equal, my partner. The woman who taught me that strength isn't about standing alone, it's about having the courage to let someone stand beside you. He lifted the crown, delicate silver, worked with moonstones, and placed it carefully on my head. You saved me from a life of cold, empty duty, he continued, and I realized he wasn't just speaking to me anymore. He was speaking to everyone. You reminded me what it means to choose love over fear, to fight for what matters instead of what's expected. His hands framed my face, thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I love you, he said simply. I choose you, today and every day after. The words landed in my chest like a vow. I love you too, I whispered, then louder, so the entire hall could hear. I choose you, not because I have to, because I want to, because you saw me when I was invisible, and you made me believe I deserved to be seen. The bond between us flared, golden and blazing. Jonathan kissed me then, in front of the entire realm, and the throne room erupted into deafening cheers. When we finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, the priestess announced, "Behold your king and queen." The sound that rose from the crowd felt like the fortress itself was celebrating. That night, alone in our chambers, with the noise of the festivities still echoing faintly through the walls, Jonathan traced my face with his fingertips. "You're not invisible anymore," he murmured. "I see you, Saray. The teacher who found purpose in ashes. The survivor who carried shame that was never hers. The woman who walked into this fortress expecting to be broken and instead became the strongest person I know." His thumb brushed my lower lip. "I see all of it, and I love every part." I caught his hand, pressed a kiss to his palm. "I see you too. The king who fights for justice even when it costs him. The man who loved once, lost everything, and was brave enough to love again." "You made me brave," he said. "No," I smiled. "You were always brave. I just reminded you." When he kissed me this time, it was different. Slower, deeper. A question and an answer and a promise all at once. We came together not because duty demanded it, not because the court expected heirs, but because we chose each other with full hearts and clear eyes. The mating bond completed in a rush of golden light and heat and overwhelming rightness, two souls tying themselves together in a way that transcended politics, obligation, or anything the world could demand of us. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. "Do you remember?" I said softly. "The girl who arrived here 6 weeks ago? Terrified and convinced she was here to pay for sins she didn't commit?" "I remember," Jonathan murmured into my hair. "I also remember thinking she was the most stubborn, brave, impossible woman I'd ever met." I smiled against his chest. She would never have believed this could happen. That the king who pulled her onto his lap would become the man who cleared her father's name, who fought for her, who loved her. "Believe it," he said, tilting my face up to meet his gaze, "because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." I kissed him softly. "Neither am I." As sleep pulled at me, wrapped in his arms with the bond humming contentedly between us, I thought about transformation, about the girl who'd made herself small and invisible, who'd apologized for existing, who'd believed she deserved only shadows. She was gone. In her place stood a woman unafraid to claim her worth, her love, her place in the light. A queen, his queen. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't afraid to be seen because the one person whose gaze mattered most looked at me like I was everything, like I always had been, like I always would be. The mating bond pulsed once, a final affirmation, and I let myself fall into sleep, with a smile on my lips and my mate's arms around me. We had found each other in the last place either of us expected, and we would never let go. Thank you for reading Saray and Jonathan's journey from invisible to unforgettable. Where are you watching from, and what was your favorite moment in their story? Was it the moment he pulled her onto his lap, the rooftop confession, or when he cleared her father's name? Drop a comment below and let me know. I read every single one.